Professor Salm, and I'm going to give you a quick and dirty talk on Chapter 11, Human Body Organization, and Chapter 14, Digestive System and Nutrition. So in Chapter 11, we talk about types of tissues. There are 4 different types: epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. The epithelial system is responsible, or the epithelial tissues are responsible for lining body surfaces and cavities. Connective tissue will be mainly concerning like your blood, cartilage, and bone. Muscular tissue will involve heart tissue, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle, which would be like muscle involved in your organs. And then you have your nervous system, which will be responsible for transmitting stimuli and conducting impulses. So you have a schematic in your text that shows the different types of epithelial cells. You have your simple squamous, which will line your lungs and blood vessels. Pseudostratified columnar, which will line your trachea. Stratified squamous, which will line your nose, mouth, esophagus, vagina, and anal canal. You have the simple columnar, which will line the small intestines and oviducts. And then you've got simple cuboidal down here in the lower left-hand corner at around 7 o'clock, which is going to be the type of tissue that is in you, or pardon me, the type of cells that are in the tissues of your kidney. You also have a schematic in your text of the different types of connective tissues. This slide shows just the types of connective tissue involving bone and cartilage. So you have your loose fibrous connective tissue, your dense fibrous, your adipose, hyaline, and compact bone. Each of these have different locations in the body and specialized functions. Some are a little softer and more pliable than others, but you'll want to be understanding how to differentiate these from one another. The connective tissue also involves, in addition to bone and cartilage, your blood, which will be responsible for transporting nutrients and oxygen and removing carbon dioxide and waste in your body. It'll also be involving pH balance and protecting from disease. Also, blood clotting is happening in the blood to prevent you from losing fluids when you've been cut. And also, it'll help distribute the heat in your body. So this schematic in your text shows what I like to call a centrifuged or spun tube of blood. So you have your fixed elements in red here on the bottom, which would include your red cells mainly, and platelets potentially. And then you also have this buffy coat layer, this grayish purple layer, which would be like your white cells. And then the rest, yellowish or beige colored, is going to be your plasma, which would be the liquid component. The liquid component of your blood, the plasma, would include about 55% of the total blood volume, which would be for like a healthy individual. And then your formative elements would be 45% of your blood volume. Your muscle tissue, there are 3 kinds: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Skeletal will be responsible for voluntary locomotion. Smooth muscle will be your visceral or involuntary movement of organs, like in your digestive system when you have peristalsis occurring, which is the involuntary rhythmic movement of your digestive system to kind of push food through your digestive system. And then your cardiac muscle is also involuntary. It will be the muscle responsible for keeping your heart beating. Here's a schematic diagram that shows smooth versus skeletal versus cardiac. You won't actually have to be identifying these types of tissues from one another in a picture format, but you should understand the general differences in location and function of these different muscle tissues. Your nervous tissue is comprised of 2 different cell types mainly: your neurons, which would be considered what we call the parenchymal cells or tissue of the nervous system. And then your neuroglial cells will be the insulative and supportive cells around the neurons. So here's a schematic diagram of a neuron with neuroglial cells around it. The neuron will be this beigeish colored cell at the top, and then the grayish blue surrounding it will be the neuroglial cells. So insulation and support for neuroglial cells, transmission of impulses is the neuron. In Chapter 11, we also talk about the different cavities in the body. You have the dorsal cavity versus the ventral cavity. Your dorsal cavity will include your cranial and vertebral cavities. Your cranial, including your brain, vertebral, including your spinal column and your spinal cord. The ventral cavity will include the thoracic, abdominal, and pelvic cavities. So you'll want to understand the differences between these two cavities. And then the thoracic will be like your heart, lung, and thymus. Your ventral cavity will be most of your abdominal organs except for those in your pelvic cavity, which will be like your bladder and your ovaries, or well, I guess your testicles wouldn't really be in the pelvic cavity technically because they're external to the body cavity. Your thoracic cavity is shown in, I think, a really nice detail here. The schematic diagram shows your lungs, your heart, and what would be your thymus. So you have, or like the mediastinal cavity. So you have like this yellow area, which is mediastinal, kind of over the breastbone or your breastbone, and then your lungs will be part of your thoracic cavity. And then you have the pericardium, which is going to be peri surrounding, cardi meaning heart. Surrounding the heart is the membrane called the pericardium. And then surrounding this entire cavity of the thorax will be your pleural membrane, or pleura. Then there's your diaphragm, which is in pink here, that sort of separates that thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. The abdominal cavity then, in addition to having this diaphragm separating it from the thorax, you'll have what's called a peritoneal membrane, or peritoneum. The peritoneum will be around the entire abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. Ooh, sorry. I kind of advanced through here. Hold on. Okay, so here's where we were. Here's where we're going. For your body membranes, you have different membranes that are going to line the cavities and internal spaces. So your pleural membrane and your peritoneal membrane would be in this category. You can also hear of the term mucous membranes, which will line your respiratory tract and like your urogenital tract. Your serous membranes will be the membranes surrounding your organs, your internal organs, so that they don't have like friction when they rub up against each other. And then your synovial membranes will be in your joints, like your elbows and your knees. Also in Chapter 11, it's important for you to know the different types of organ systems and the medical specialties that are responsible for these organ systems. So for your integumentary system, your dermatologists will be specializing in the integumentary system. Your gastroenterologists, or GI doctors, will be responsible for the digestive system. There is a cardiologist that handles the heart, which is the cardiovascular system. We also have a hematologist, which would be a doctor responsible for blood disorders. Hematologist, that's HEMA-tologist. You have an immunologist, or an infectious disease doctor, which would handle disorders regarding the immune system. You have the pulmonologist, P-U-L-M-O, pulmonologist, which would be responsible for respiratory disorders. The urinary system would be disorders handled by a urologist or a nephrologist. Nephro, N-E-P-H-R-O, would be a kidney doctor, or a doctor that oftentimes will work with diabetic patients. You have an orthopedic doctor, or an orthopedic or an osteopathic doctor, which would deal with the bones. Muscular system disorders, I believe, like your kinesiologist could work with that, or sometimes your pain doctors, which maybe there's a more clinical term for pain. I know they have a pain management clinic at many healthcare systems, but your kinesiologist, that would be K-I-N-E-S, kinesiology, would be the study of muscular or pain disorders. And then you have the nervous system, which would be neurologist, of course. Endocrine system, again, your nephrologist would partly deal with endocrine issues, endocrine being hormone related. So you have endocrinologists handling hormone disorders. And then for your reproductive system, male reproductive, typically a urologist would deal with you initially, and then for females, either your obstetrician or gynecologist would deal with your reproductive system. So it's important in Chapter 11 to know the tissue types and let's review. The tissue types, the cavities, and the various organ systems in the body and the medical specialties related to them. So for the digestive system, you want to know the structures and the functions. And the main structures would be depicted in this diagram here. So you have the mouth and the salivary glands, the esophagus, your stomach, your small intestines, the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, which would be the three main areas of the small intestines. And then the colon, there's the ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid colon. And then you also have the accessory organs of the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas that you'll want to know about. So we have, as the purpose of the digestive system, ingesting and digesting, absorbing nutrients but not necessarily transporting. It's important to make that distinction. Your digestive system will absorb the nutrients, but your cardiovascular system will actually transport the nutrients. And then you want the digestive system to eliminate indigestible wastes. So these next few slides, and this PowerPoint is available to you through Marion Online, explains the salient points in terms of structure and function of the esophagus, stomach, and so on and so forth, the various primary organs of the digestive system. So you'll want to be reviewing this slide. The pharynx, I want to point out, is like the triaging center for all food and air for your body. So as your mouth brings in food and air, your nasal canal also brings in air. Your pharynx is going to be where the air decides to go down the trachea and the food decides to go down the esophagus. And you have the function of the epiglottis, which is going to cover the trachea. So it's kind of a trapdoor that covers the windpipe as you swallow food. And then you also have the uvula, which will ensure that no food goes up into your nasal canal. So you can see the uvula here. Here's the mouth. So the uvula kind of hangs down and normally, but it will like flip up and cover that nasal canal so that food doesn't go up into that area. And then your epiglottis here will cover up your trachea as the bolus of food goes down your esophagus. So the small intestine has the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The large intestine has the cecum, colon, rectum, and the anal canal. And your accessory organs are the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. Now, it's important to make the distinction that you have in the duodenum, your duodenum will be responsible for receiving food from your stomach, as well as juices from the liver and from the pancreas as well. So it's kind of a triage center of its own. So you have the pharynx being a triage center for food and air. Your duodenum will be the triage center for contents from the stomach, liver, and pancreas. And so the liver will secrete bile, which is held up in the gallbladder. But if that closet, that is the gallbladder, is closed off or eliminated in the case of a gallbladder removal, you'll have just a hallway to store the things. If your closet's gone, then you just put things in the hallway. The common bile duct would be, or the common hepatic duct, as is explained here, would be where we just keep that bile. And so these juices will all be fed into the duodenum and help to digest the nutrients that comes through out of the stomach. Here's another slide that talks about the different functions of the liver. I'm going to have to wrap this presentation up shortly. Gallbladder will produce the bile. Liver will produce. Gallbladder will store 400 to 800 milliliters of bile. That's quite a lot. We've got different enzymatic juices that are going to come from different organs. So you'll want to be familiar with the purpose of amylase, pepsin, trypsin, and lipase. And then there are a few other slides in this presentation that talk about the different vitamins and minerals that you need. Too much and too little is possible, so you'll need to be responsible for knowing these tables in your chapter. and then various disorders and diseases of this system. And that's all for this presentation.